Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Friday Feelings, where we turn emotions into power, vulnerability into strength, and remind you to feel everything, fear nothing, and transform your life. I'm your host, Jenelle Friday, and this episode is a very amazing, difficult, emotional, and somewhat of a spiritual podcast episode. So I'm going to give you some context and warning before you get into this episode that we're talking about some complex issues that could be emotionally sensitive for listeners. So I just want to give that caveat before we dive in. Today, we are talking about how do you forgive the unforgivable? And we are graced with my mom today, Kathy Swanland. Mom, thank you so much for being here and being willing to be vulnerable and talk about some trauma that has affected all of us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we talk about forgiveness, I think it's one of those things that whether you're religious or spiritual or not at all, forgiveness is something that every human being on the planet has to face at some point in their life.
True.
And we've all been hurt.
True.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to say that forgiveness isn't easy. We know that, but it is emotionally intelligent. And so we are here to talk about forgiveness, that it's not a weakness. It's actually emotional mastery. So Mom, can you set the stage for what we're talking about today?
Yeah. So I was in a long-term marriage with your dad, ended up being 26 years at the end. And there was difficulty with your dad having a problem with honesty, and that was created a toxic environment in our marriage. But after about the 24th year of marriage, I found out that your dad was, I'll use the word cavorting. Your dad was having an unreasonable and an unhealthy relationship with one particular teenage girl that I knew about specifically. And I had the information confirmed through an innocent walk looking for a pencil, actually, and opening up his briefcase to find all kinds of material that supported and confirmed that he was having this relationship with a teenage girl. And so that was the beginning of me realizing that that the betrayal was more than I was willing to live with, especially because it was with a man who could not be honest.
Yeah. And, for those of you that do not know my story, this occurred, what year was that, Mom?
Oh,
2022 or 2002?
Yeah, it
Right
was
around
about that. Yes,
2002.
yes.
We're now in 2024. So we're a little over 20 years. And it was in 2020 that the truth about dad being a pedophile, who molested myself, and there are other women in the family who have had similar experiences. So that was, I feel like the divorce was kind of a chapter of a much larger story.
Yes, because at the time that the divorce happened, none of us had any idea that there had been other issues with children, even in our own family, that had been happening. That had not come to the surface.
Yeah. So in plain talk, would we say that that's an unforgivable sin?
Well, I would think for a lot of people, it is an unforgivable sin. And I think the betrayal is, it cuts deep, and it cuts deep because it was like the final betrayal. And when you hang on and you hang on and you want to have, the best of intentions of believing, that if you are honest and you are open and you are communicative and you are hopeful, that somehow this spouse who has a problem that started before you, has occurred and continued with you, is somehow going to find its way to come to a completion to a point where the relationship could go from toxic to somehow acceptable. I won't even say healthy, but
Yeah.
acceptable.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a lot of us as women, and I came to the place to go through a post-divorce support group of sorts to find out that there were so many women who were of the same had the same issues as I did. Betrayal of all kinds
Yeah.
from men.
Yeah.
And so, and there were men there as well. So, I mean, of course,
It
it
goes
is a
both
two-way.
ways.
Exactly,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. But I did realize that as women, because we're nurturers, because we, look to our family as being sacred a lot of times, and our children, and knowing that there's that knowing that if I move forward with this, I am the one who stands at the place to rip the family apart. You see it as that. If I am the petitioner of the divorce, I am basically stepping out to say, I'm gonna drag my children through the mud to get rid of their dad from my life, not knowing what it would do
Yeah.
as far as your relationship with
Yeah.
your dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a difficulty because we want to hang on. We want to give it everything we've got. We want to keep the family together. We want our children to have, the advantages of parents that we believe at least have the best intentions for our children. I mean, at that point, I did not know
Yeah.
all of the other
Right.
stuff.
Right. So, walk me through the emotions, right? Because we focus on emotions on Friday feelings, right? And the acceptance that emotions are normal, that emotions, deep seated emotions like rage, like hate, like, right, stress, incredulousness, horror, are real, that we all feel. So, can you help us understand the emotions, not just from the point that you were feeling, but what was happening to your body in those moments as well? Because we talk a lot about mind-body connection,
Right.
and I think it's important to identify that if you can't name the emotions you're feeling, it's really difficult to move forward. And oftentimes our bodies give us indicators of those feelings.
Right. So the stress was incredible. So what happened was because of the nature of your dad's employment, and I was on the backside trying to keep all of the financial mechanisms for our home and our family together. I had to take several months to put together a financial picture that separated me from his business and all of his finances, so that when I moved forward with the divorce, I would not be dragging along this litany of debt and all of the other financial issues that were part of the way your dad did his business. So it took me a long time to prepare to come to the place to realize that, okay, I'm now at a place where I can actually make the move to separate and divorce him. So over those months, knowing that, I've been betrayed in every area of our life, and the final straw, of course, was the intimacy. And so I had already become so numb to my own feelings because of wanting to protect my children, my three children, and wanting to believe that I was a strong enough person that I would be able to manage the aftermath of that fallout, whatever that was, and just, take it as it was going to come. I think the anger and the fear, because there's fear doing that, fear of what's going to happen to the kids and how are the kids going to take it. So there were so many things at that time going through my brain and body connection that I was disconnected. I was completely disconnected. And I would say, yes, I was angry. I hated your dad for what he was doing to our family. But I had also these blinders on that I think moms get, where when there's an emergency and it involves your children, you have these blinders, and all you're focused on is, what do I need to do so that my children can be transported through this process of whatever it is, whether it's it's an emergency, it's an accident, a boo-boo, it's, falling off the ladder. We close everything in. And so all we see is what's ahead, what's directly ahead concerning our children. And we really do, well, at least I do. I set aside all of my own emotions because I can't deal with all of those right now. I want my children to know that I'm there to be strong with them, to support them. So all of that closed in on me through those months that I was preparing to actually deliver the news to your dad. And so I had very close friends who, and I will say, the timing of this was also difficult because your brother, my middle child, was in his senior year at high school, and I did not want to taint his graduation. It all happened like around February. He was graduating in May. And so I was trying to hold on until after the graduation. But I had some very close friends who called the question and said, you can't do this anymore, because my whole being was being so negatively affected that the people who loved me and who wanted my best were the ones who saw what was going on. They could tell that the rot that was starting within me was eking out in different ways at different places with different people. Just the way I was starting to give them an indication that, you're coming close to
So
being.
can you give some specifics to help us understand?
Well, I'm a pretty light-hearted, happy person most of the time. And that was so stressful that I found myself having to spend so much, in an inordinate amount of time, preparing to deliver the news, that I really was. I became isolated. I think I was isolating a little bit. I wasn't returning calls. I wasn't engaging with my friendships. I was, probably a little bit shorter than I normally was. I wasn't, I wasn't coming alongside of anybody else, which would normally be the kind of person that I am, where, it's my gift to serve, and, definitely not having anybody over to our home. And
What was happening in your body?
so I wasn't sleeping. So you can tell, when you're not sleeping, you're sliding down a slippery slope of all kinds of illness, of, physical issues, skin issues, of, not just the bags under the eyes, but you can tell, you gain weight, usually you lose weight. Um,
Did you find
yeah.
moments that were difficult to breathe because of the emotions that were overwhelming?
When I finally came to the place, not at the point where I was preparing, after the point
Was there a
of
release?
delivery, was where it would come to that, where I would be, my safe space to fall apart is in my car. And so, that's where those kinds of things would happen, where I would feel like I could just scream, or I could, drive to the water, to the beach, to the lake, wherever, to the pier, and, have those moments of release. But it wasn't until after the news had been delivered. And most of that, I think, was at that point, I was so done with all of the garbage that was part of the relationship, that it was really the release of knowing that now I have to turn my sights towards you kids, and try and understand how I can, be in the moment with you kids, but still protective as a mom, and not saying too much, and not wanting to, I didn't want you to hate your dad, even though I hated him. I didn't want to involve you in any kind of a ping pong battle between us that, would pit you against him at all. So then there's the concern of being overly careful of every word you say,
Mhm.
and of who's listening, and all of what goes along with
Yeah.
that.
So one of the reasons we're recording this episode now is because Good Friday is coming,
Mhm.
Easter's coming. And whether you're religious or not, I think redemption is a good word to use for this idea of forgiving the unforgivable. So you had a moment in your car that I remember you sharing with
Yeah.
me. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I was outside Marshall's store, department store, and I don't remember if I had talked to somebody, but I remember sitting there, and this would have been, oh, probably months after, because it was summertime, it was warm, the windows were down, and I realized that I finally came to the place where I didn't want to spend any more time chewing over all of what had happened, all of the past, wrongs and hurts and betrayals that were just poison to me. And so I realized that I came to the place to not want anything from your dad, and I didn't need anything from him either. And so when I'm sitting in my car and I'm thinking, wow, I think actually I might be able to let this go and just allow myself the privilege of healing because I don't need him in my life. I don't have to have him in my life. And he offers me nothing anymore that is going to add anything to my life. So I would say when I came to the place where I didn't want or need anything from him, then the door was open for me to say, I can forgive him because it didn't matter to me if there was retribution. I'm not that kind of a person anyway. And I really believed that his retribution was going to come more effectively from the Almighty, than it was ever going to come from me. I was just dragging around this cart full of toxins and poisons
Grievances,
that was
yeah.
constantly spilling all over me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, a lot of people have a different version of what forgiveness means. So maybe we can talk about what forgiveness doesn't mean. Forgiveness doesn't mean,
Forgiving and forgetting. No.
right? There's no forgetting.
There,
Forgiving doesn't make the actions of what he did right.
correct.
So we're not validating someone by forgiving them, right? And forgiveness does not obligate you to a relationship.
No. Forgiveness is a gift that you give yourself to take yourself off of the merry-go-round that you are on, the toxic ride that continues to come around and it ends up slapping you in the butt. It ends up, blinding you. It ends up hurting you. And so forgiveness is stepping off the merry-go-round to say, I'm done. I don't need it anymore.
So then what happens when you're triggered? When you have to deal with him because of remember the credit card issue that happened that we had to talk about, right? It's after the fact and you're having to face that individual head on.
Yeah.
That's a triggering moment, right?
Yeah.
So you can go back and wallow in the anger and the hatred and feel all those feelings again, right? So in those moments when you were triggered, what's happening in your brain to keep yourself level and reminding yourself that you've forgiven and you've moved forward?
Well, in that case, because he was not honorable with, and what happened there was one credit card that had not been used that I thought was shut down and it was not. And he picked it back up and he started using that. And so I was connected to that. And so, of course, he wasn't making the payments. And so they were coming to garnish my wages.
I
And
remember you called
yeah,
me freaked
yeah.
out.
I did. And I did not have any relationship with your dad after that was anything but the nature of what he needed for you kids, or
Transactional.
just very transactional. And so when that happened, no, it was definitely a trigger to me again, because then it is a threat that he is now taking from me to uh, to affect my life in a negative way so that I could no longer potentially provide for myself, provide for you kids. I still had two at home. And so that was a fear marker for me. And that was a fear marker for me. And I had to go through the process again. After that was done, after it had, come to light, I think
And I'm
you
flexing a little bit here, folks.
yeah.
I came in and basically I told my dad that if he did not make it right, that there would be drastic consequences for his business, and he took care of it. So, side note here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And so then I go through the process again. That's that process of I don't need anything from him. I don't want anything from him. And I'm not looking for retribution.
mhm,
I'm not wishing upon him negative because as I do that, I'm dragging my children back into all of that again.
mhm,
So I also saw that process as being not just freeing for me and it allowed the healing process to begin, but it was also holding my children out of that terrible toxic waste that I
mhm.
had carried with me that now has been dumped. I don't want you to be in a position as my child to be dragged back into that by constantly
Yeah.
bringing that
Yeah.
up or having that as part of my life anymore.
Yeah. So as we've been in this topic of forgiveness, right? There's going to be listeners listening to this that they didn't get to cut that person out of their life. Maybe that person is co-parenting. Maybe that person is a family member that they have to see at holidays, right?
Mhm.
How do you address forgiveness with an individual who's hurt you and continues to hurt you? Whether that's on purpose or not, it's active forgiveness.
So, I mean, the hurt is a choice that you receive. If I'm being hurt by someone, then I have to stop and ask, why is this hurting me? And then that goes to the question, do I need something from this person? Is it hurting me
Mm,
because I need something else? Is it hurting me because I want something else?
mm,
If I'm constantly asking myself, why am I hurt by this person that I have forgiven, that I don't want anything from or need anything from? Can I be a respectful adult knowing this is the father of my children? Now, and I have to tell you, I mean, I've had a few, I've had some interactions with him over things with you mostly, medical issues and that sort of thing. And when I look at him, what I see is I want my children to have the opportunity for a relationship with their dad that is not overshadowed by a mom who is holding this, bully stick or, some kind of
yeah.
a weaponized. I didn't want the weaponization of that relationship to be unduly thrust upon
Yeah.
you. So what
Yeah.
what he was going to do from his side, that was a given anyway. I mean, it's the kind of person that he is. So then I have to ask myself too. The other question is, okay, if I know this person and I lived with him for 26 years, so I know what he is capable and what he's not capable of. So if I am looking at him and I'm thinking that I want to see something that I know he's incapable of, but I'm thinking in my mind he should be able to do this, but I know in my heart that the experience I've had tells me he can't, then I'm the one who has unrealistic expectations. I'm the one who's expecting something that he's already shown me he's incapable of
Mm,
giving,
mm,
incapable of producing,
mhm,
incapable of. So that has to then come back to me. I have to be able to swallow and live in the truth of what is. What do I know is? And then after the divorce, as he makes his bed and he has to lay in his bed, then I am there freely able to comfort those who are hurt by that, freely able to come alongside and walk down that road of difficulty because I know that if I live in the truth and if I am truly at a place of forgiveness, I have something to give.
mm. That's so profound. And I mean, I think when I think about that, right, there's a conversation I have with someone in my life on a regular basis, and there's hurt there because there's a relationship that they can't get out of. The relationship is very toxic. And my question to this individual is usually, what do you know to be true about this individual? Because I think it speaks to what you're talking about, which are expectations. We talk a lot about expectations, uncommunicated expectations, very clear and level expectations. And a lot of the time, emotional triggers force you to ask you the question, why am I triggered? Why is this emotion happening right now? Is this emotion relevant to the circumstances that I'm in? Am I being triggered because of the behavior or the words that someone's using? And it's triggering me because
Oh, God, bless
Excuse
you.
me. That's what you get for live recording. Is this trigger coming from a different place? And I think this is also, it ties directly in with my emotional triggers throughout my teens and 20s that I couldn't explain, couldn't put words to, couldn't grasp where all of that was coming from. And now that we know the truth, it absolutely makes sense, right? So active forgiveness is when you're in the middle of that circumstance and this person is hurting you. What you're saying is in that moment to ask, what do I know to be true about this person? Are they rational? Are they level-headed? Are they remorseful? Are they aware that they're hurting you? Sometimes we hurt each other without realizing that we're doing so, right?
Mhm.
So to kind of bring this to a point where we say, okay, so we've kind of identified what forgiveness is not. We've identified that forgiveness is an active choice because we can wallow, right? We
Mhm.
can relive those experiences. If you've been deeply wounded by someone that you love and you're feeling overwhelmed or stressed, it's easy to go back to those memories and sit in those emotions and be angry. Because sometimes, and I'll tell you this, um, it feels good to be angry.
Mhm. Well, it's an empowering emotion.
Right. So I remember when all of this went down and the divorce happened, I was living and sitting in that anger, angry for you, angry about the lies that we're being told, angry about the way that he was handling the whole circumstances, and just completely incredulous that this was happening in our family. And it took me a long time to let the anger go because it was so much easier to stay angry than it is to forgive.
Well, and justifiable anger is still toxic. If it comes from a place that you dwell on it for the purpose of empowering you to have something over the other person, and that is never going to be healthy.
Right.
And so, I mean, I had betrayal from my own mother too. And so in that relationship, I had to always ask myself, is she doing this on purpose? Does she know what she's doing? And I had to have a kind of a come to Jesus moment with her to
Mhm.
ask her, do you realize what it means to me when you say this or when you do this?
Mm.
And so having that conversation allowed me to come close to understanding more about her, what she saw, what she heard, how she reacted, so that then I could ask myself, when it happens again and again, okay, who is this person? What do I know is true? She's told me what's true. I, why would I want to go back into carrying my toxic waste
Yeah,
around with me?
yeah, yeah. Well, I
The
mean,
relationship then is more important with
and
someone who isn't aware, who,
Mhm.
you know, who is who's wanting to be in a healthier relationship, but has their own
Limitations.
blockage,
Yeah, yeah.
their own
Yeah, I mean, and
limitations.
I think that speaks to, again, when you have someone in your life who is hurting you that you love, and to your point, you were able to come to the table with grandma and say, "Are you aware that
Mhm.
this is how this is coming across?" That's confrontation. That's difficult conversation. That's managing a difficult person. And conflict is something that I think most people shy away from. And
Mhm.
so part of healing through forgiveness sometimes requires a difficult conversation.
It does. And for me, it has to come from a place where you've dealt with the hurt and you are looking for some restoration. You're looking for, let's come to a place so we can be at peace with one another, because the relationship is much more important than the differences or the
Mhm.
difficulties that may or may not be um, intentional.
Yeah.
And so, I think there's that question that's always asked too. With your dad, there was no relationship. That was my choice.
Yeah.
And I made that choice for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
Um,
I did as well.
yeah.
Having to make the decision when the truth came out in 2020, ultimately trying to find peace, trying to understand what reconciliation could look like, um, putting out that olive branch to say there is a starting point, but these are my requirements for that starting point. When he stayed silent and then ultimately denied everything, it was a very clear, okay, then I'm done. Because you had shared kind of at that night that we were playing Pinnacle with Karen, That your statement of, I don't need anything from you and I don't want anything from you. And that was your way of coming to peace because, right, self-management is one of those skills in emotional intelligence. And this is a self-management skill that says, you no longer get to control how I feel or show up in the world. And all of those emotions that are tied to unforgiveness are a form of control. They have control over you. Your thoughts can manipulate your emotions. We already know that. And so I'm curious, you talk about screaming in your car. Were there any other types of ways that you released those emotions?
Well, I'm a praying woman, so yes, I mean, I did pray a lot, and I understood the power of learning to pray and
Mm,
connect with Almighty God. I didn't really share a lot with other people at
mm,
that point because I felt like there was a community awareness of some of your dad's the businesses that he had in the community. And so I wanted to be very careful not um, to be the person who, would be like gossip or, to slander him in any way. I didn't need to have that. And really, I mean, when you come down to the whole thing of forgiveness and to the other person, we have choices.
mm,
We always have choices. And sometimes it's helpful to be able to find people that you trust to say, hey, I don't know what my choices are in this circumstance. And could you help me think outside the box because, we become so closed in. Can you help me
mhm,
think outside the box? Help me understand what are my choices in this relationship?
mm. I like that.
Because I want to be able to take back some of that choice to be a person who can say, yes, I overcame that not by myself, but because I had trusted people around me,
Yeah.
because I have a God who loves me and provides for me. But I think the choice of seeing that I can make the choice to step out. It's going to be hard.
Hmm.
It's going to be scary, but then I have to ask myself, what is the value? What's
Hmm.
my end game here?
Hmm.
My end game is to continue to be a healthy mother, a healthier grandmother, a healthy part of my society, a healthy friend that engages in lifelong relationships that are not tainted by the anger and the toxic waste that that
Hmm.
relationship
Hmm.
had me carrying behind
Hmm.
me. So if I'm looking forward, I'm wanting the best for my children
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
spite of knowing that I
Yeah.
was the one who opened the door for the
Yeah.
divorce to happen.
Um, so let's talk about today, right? You went through this process of forgiveness and healing in the mid 2000s.
Mhm.
Okay. So now when you look at your life and someone hurts you and you have to deal with forgiveness, what do you think has, what do you think are the direct impacts to how you handle forgiveness today that are a direct result of the circumstance with dad?
So I think that so much of our emotional health we can see as muscle development.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see forgiveness as also being muscle development. It's
Mm.
emotional muscle development.
Yeah.
And so the more that I came to the place to understand the power of forgiveness for me and for those who were connected to me, then I'm not going to say it's easy, but it was easy. It's become easier because if I'm connected to someone and I know who they are, then I have a place to be able to say, well, maybe they're not aware. Like, let's take grandma. Maybe they're not aware that this is a trigger or this is a hardship to me or this is offensive to
Mm.
me. And the relationship's important enough that I'm gonna say, hey, can we have a difficult
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation? So I think strengthening those emotional muscles make it possible to have it not be so fearful. Like I'm not racked with fear anymore when it
Mm.
comes to the issue of forgiveness. Is it difficult? Sometimes it is difficult,
Yeah.
but it doesn't cause me to become um, closed in and shut off from the world.
Isolated.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
um, we talk about relationship management. It's not just about how we interact with others, it's how we nurture our internal dialogue because forgiveness can transform our self-talk from I'm still hurt to I've reclaimed my peace. And so, Mom, for anyone who's listening today who is resonating with you, empathizing with you, and in the middle of their own place of unforgiveness or struggling to forgive very deep, potentially long-term wounds, um, what's a practical piece of advice or a takeaway that you would want to share?
So I mean, I would have to go back to the first thing that I realized is to ask myself, if I'm having trouble forgiving, for me, that means I want something or I need something from this person. What is that?
Mm-hmm.
It is an instantaneous message to me to stop, let the world go by, and make my stand right now to decide if this relationship is important to me, what do I want? What do I need? And how can I communicate that in a loving, unthreatening way? If it's a relationship like what I had with someone who's uh, not going to be in my life anymore, then I have to ask myself, even though I'm so angry and maybe hurt, horrified, deceived, whatever, all those things, if I'm feeling that way still, if I'm hurt or if I'm offended or if I feel like I can't forgive them, I have to ask myself the tough question.
Mm. So then I would say I talk a lot about getting out of your head, that change, real change doesn't happen in your brain. Sometimes we need a visual stimulus, and sometimes we need a reminder. And so my question for you listening is, what emotion or pain are you still carrying that may be asking for a release? And maybe an actionable challenge could be that you write down the name of that person or situation. And then you say aloud, when you think about that person, you no longer get to steal my peace. I am reclaiming it. And really what I want to leave our listeners with is a statement that's very clear and I think speaks to the heart of what we've said today, which is forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it frees your future.
Amen. Yep.
So, Mom, I'm beyond grateful because I knew that this could potentially be a difficult thing to record. And you and I have worked on our relationship throughout the years that kind of were fueled through dad circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But I am so grateful to have you as an example on forgiveness specifically, because it's such a hard topic, I think, for a lot of people, because most of us don't really know where to start. We've never really been taught anything other than, oh yeah, just read your Bible and pray, or you just need to let it go. Don't make me sing Elsa Frozen. But there's that approach of like, you know what, just you're going to eventually get over it. You're going to move forward. You're going to stop thinking about it. And when trauma or wounds are soul deep, scarred. I'm scarred for life. I know I am. But I've allowed that scar to heal and I don't keep reopening it, re-ripping it open. But that's because I had people in my life and I've learned through EQ how to do that. And I think there are a lot of people still out there that have no idea. And so from my heart to one woman to another, from a child to a parent, from a human being to a human being, having living examples of you talking about forgiveness in a very tumultuous circumstance where it feels like that would be unforgivable is hope.
Mm-hmm.
It's hope for others. It's encouraging for others. And so I'm very grateful for your
You're
time.
welcome, honey. Well, my last thing I would say is the phrase should not be forgive and forget.
No,
The phrase should be forgive and live.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you're listening today, I'm going to encourage you to forgive and live. And as we wrap today, like I always say, to be inspired to feel deeply. And if those feelings are feelings of rage and of hate and of anger and of sorrow and grief and pain, you have to feel them to get through them. You can't ignore them. You cannot bury them. They are still going to remain no matter how deep you bury them. And like my mom talked about, maybe you can set them to the side to survive the circumstance, but know that no matter how far you walk or travel away from that circumstance, those emotions will find you. And so, in order to get through the emotion, you have to feel them and go through them. I'm going to encourage you to live fearlessly. And as we talked about fear today, fear is debilitating, fear is isolating. Fear can be the primary driver of so many of your emotions. And if you can face your fear to get to the other side, you'll find that freedom and to always be authentic to yourself. If you're feeling something deeply, don't let it go by without asking why. Those emotional triggers are built as a protective device that your internal ego, that person inside of you that works to protect you from all things, needs to address and to be authentic to that person. And so find an emotional release, whether that's crafting. I love to paint and create fun things, whether that's cooking. Maybe it's you go for a walk with your dog. Maybe it's you go into your car, you bring a pillow, you drive in the middle of nowhere and you scream out loud, as loud as you can. Those emotional releases allow you to stay authentic. I'm going to encourage you to keep leaning into those feelings because it is only through those feelings that transformation really starts from within. So I wish everyone a very happy Easter, and I will see you all next Friday. Thanks for joining me.